Hello everyone, it's Jeff again, and I am in the extreme southeast corner of New York State. And as soon as they're done loading me at this warehouse, I would like to tell you a story about something that happened in this area a long time ago, and it changed the path of what we know about the human mind. Chatham, Vermont, downtown, where this little depot was where the Rutland Railroad ended. While sitting here and eating a hot dog, I was reminded of a story that I was told a long time ago when I was in school about an employee that worked for the Rutland Railroad and how something that happened to him fundamentally changed what we know about the human mind and the human body. Prior to the 1850s, very little was known about the human mind and the process of where our thoughts came from and where exactly in the body our feelings of anger and of love and of jealousy. Very little was known. As a matter of fact, in the Egyptian days, when they were mummifying the pharaohs, they didn't save the brain. It was very important to save the heart because they believed that that's where your feelings came from and your thoughts, and it was the essence of man. But the brain was removed from the body and thrown away. Countless generations passed until this man came along, Dr. John Harlow, who was born November 25th, 1819. He was born in Whitehall, New York, and he studied at the Philadelphia School of Anatomy. And in 1844, he graduated from the Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia. He was a big believer in phrenology, the belief that the shape of your head and the bumps on your head was the deciding factor of whether you were a nice person or whether you were a criminal. And he set up his practice in Cavendish, Vermont. And it's Cavendish, Vermont that we're going to next because that's where the next part of this story happens. At 4:30 p.m. on the 13th of September, 1848, Phineas Gage was directing a work gang blasting rock while preparing the roadbed for the Rutland and Burlington Railway a little bit south of the village of Cavendish, Vermont. Setting a blast entailed boring a deep hole in an outcrop of rock and adding blasting powder in a fuse, then using a tamping rod to pack damp sand or clay or other inert material into the hole above the powder in order to contain the blast's energy and direct it to the surrounding rock. It is believed that while working on this exact cut, someone forgot to put sand in the hole that Phineas was tamping with a metal rod, and that caused an explosion. After the accident, Phineas Gage was alert and talking and rode the 2 miles in an ox cart back to the tiny village of Cavendish, to Dr. Harlow's office. Dr. Harlow was asked about the incident for the local newspaper, and he did a little drawing of what actually happened for the newspaper, showing the exact way that the bar had gone under his eye and out the top of his head completely. The bar was 13.25 pounds of steel, 3 foot 7 inches long, and 1.25 inches in diameter. Before the accident, Phineas Gage was a much-loved man. Here he is pictured with his crew before the accident, and he was much respected, and the railroad had a great deal to say about him in his performance evaluations before the accident. He was described as hard-working, responsible, and a great favorite with the men in his charge, also being regarded as the most efficient and capable foreman under their employ. Gage survived the accident, but his convalescence was long, difficult, and uneven. His mother and his uncle was summoned from Lebanon, New Hampshire, some 30 miles away, and on the morning after the accident, the second day, he lost control of his mind and became delirious. On the fourth day, he was again rational, knowing his friends, and after a week's improvement, Dr. Harlow entertained for the first time that he thought it was possible that Gage may survive. On the 12th day, the doctor noted that he seldom spoke unless spoken to, and that his strength was failing. His coma had deepened, and his left eye had become much more swollen. On the 14th day, the smell from his wounds was unbearable, and it was believed hourly that he would die. As a matter of fact, the local coffin builder had been summoned to fashion him a coffin, and his mother brought fresh, clean clothes for him to be buried in. On the 14th day, Dr. Harlow saved his life once again by cutting the fungi that was growing out of the top of his head off and draining all of the abscesses all the way around his head. On the 24th day, Gage succeeded in raising himself up and took one step toward his chair. 1 month later, he was walking up and down stairs and about the house, and even went outside to visit the garden. Soon after, he caught a cold and ran a mild fever, and it took about 10 days for him to get over it. And by November 25th, which was 10 weeks after his injury, Gage was strong enough to return to his parents' home in Lebanon, New Hampshire. He may have recovered physically from his wounds, but whereas before he was considered a very likable person, now he was profane and was easily provoked to wrath. He was volatile, and he was not the person that he once was. A very popular saying in town was, "Gage just isn't Gage anymore." Unable to reclaim his railroad job, the railroad just didn't want him anymore. He became kind of a living museum exhibit. There was a time when he was with the Barnum's American Museum in New York City, and advertisements have also been found for public appearances by Gage, which may have been arranged and promoted by himself in New Hampshire and Vermont. In August of 1852, Gage was invited to South America to work as a long-distance stagecoach driver outside of Santiago. He was in charge of caring for horses and often driving a coach heavily laden and drawn by 6 horses. After his health began to fail in mid-1859, he left South America and arrived in San Francisco, in his mother's words, in a feeble condition, having failed very much since he left New Hampshire. Had many ill turns while in Valparaiso, especially during last year, and suffered much from hardship and exposure. His mother and his sister stayed in San Francisco and cared for him until he recovered. In February of 1860, he went to work at a large farm in Santa Clara, California, but he began to have seizures, so he could no longer work. Gage died on May 18, 1860, and was buried in the Lone Mountain Cemetery in San Francisco. He had lived 13 years since the accident. He was buried with his tamping rod, which never left his side. When Dr. Harlow heard of his death, he requested to the family that the body be exhumed and that the head be removed for study. Gage's beloved tamping rod and his skull are on display at the Harvard Medical School's Warren Museum. Dr. Harlow was an early pioneer in discovering how Phineas Gage's injuries caused his personality and his cognitive function to change. And although it was a horrible accident, we learned an immense amount about how the brain governs a person's emotions and their ability to function. We have come full circle, back to Cavendish, Vermont, about a block away from the tiny office where Dr. Harlow treated Phineas Gage. I leave you now, but remember everyone, be good to each other, do good deeds, think good thoughts, and I will see you on the next adventure.